before COVID, we didn't really openly talk about mental health. And then the pandemic happened and there was so much that went on in the world. And so it sort of lend itself to be more open about what we're experiencing. So in that way, I think we've become more vocal. And now it's up to companies to actually provide the platforms to help their employees. But I do think COVID allowed us to be more open and to attempt to talk about bring our personal selves to work. So bringing our full selves to work.
Welcome to Insights into Success. We're with your host, Paul Dodds. We hope to educate, inspire, and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success. Welcome to Insights into Success, where today's special guest is Neelu Kaur, who's all the way from, where are you? I think the East Coast of America, I think, if I recall correctly.
New York.
New York, fantastic. Love New York. I've been to New York, I think, about 3 or 4 times. Love the place. Great place to visit. I don't know, what's it like to live there?
It's wonderful. Although you have to figure out your rhythm. So Manhattan's very fast paced. So if that's something that doesn't work for you, there are plenty of places surrounding the city or surrounding Manhattan that are a little bit calmer. So I live in Forest Hills, Queens, which is green, parks everywhere. So it's a little bit different pace than New York City, like Manhattan rather, although it is considered New York City.
Right. I've been there in summertime, but my family, we also wanted to kind of see what it would be like to experience a Christmas there. So I've had a Christmas in New York, which is very cool. The only thing is there wasn't a lot of snow, which is a bit disappointing.
It is actually, even though I don't celebrate Christmas, it is my favorite time of the year because everything is just lit up and it's beautiful. And it is an amazing time to be in New York City.
Yeah. And there's something special about it being really cold. Like over in this part of the world, our Christmas is in summer. So it's kind of cool to have a Christmas, which is more like television, where it's all cold and hopefully with snow. So,
right.
Yeah, no, I love going to New York. Anyway, we're digressing a little bit. But yeah, Neelu, so you are a leadership and wellness coach. And I was just wondering if you could, and an author too, I should say. And we'll talk about that as well in due course. But I'd love for you to kick this off by telling us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up doing what you're doing now.
So I consider myself a corporate American burnout survivor. Like I am the person that got fired all the time. I got downsized numerous times. I probably have the most number of getting fired or getting laid off than anyone, I would say. And so one of the reasons is because I didn't have the skills to self-advocate, which is why I wrote Be Your Own Cheerleader. However, to answer your question, so while I was in full-time roles in organizations, I really struggled with my mental health and well-being. And so in 2013, in my last downsizing, I decided that I was going to be my own boss, become a solopreneur, and focus on training and educating companies to help their employees not deal with the things that I dealt with. And so that's been my mission.
So did you... When you've been laid off or fired so many times, it must have been hard not to take that personally.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it really impacts your self-efficacy, the way you think of yourself, everything about yourself in the workplace. And it seeps into personal life too. Like I thought something was wrong with me. In hindsight, there was nothing wrong with me. It's just that I needed to gain some skills that I didn't have at the time.
And for you, looking back now, do you think that what you went through was commonplace or more unique to you and people like you? Whatever that means for them.
Right. Yes. No, I noticed that. So for example, I'll give you an example. In 2013, in my last downsizing, I was escorted back to my desk and I had just a few minutes to grab my belongings. So I was treated like a criminal. I looked around. I had a very short period of time to sort of collect myself. I had been at that organization for about 3.5 years. And when I looked around and I saw the people still in the chairs that did not get downsized, they were all white, they were all men, and many women also. So, but I felt like there was a memo or something that I just didn't get. And I realized that maybe it was racial bias, maybe it was some sort of, I really don't know. I don't have proof to say that it was bias related, but I know now in hindsight that it was probably because I didn't know how to self-advocate. I did not know how to, I was so much more about the we, the collective, which is something we can talk about in terms of Asian and South Asian cultures. We're very collective and very we-based. And in corporate America and in North America, it's very I-based. And so when you come from a we culture, it's all about group harmony, the goodness of the group. And you're taught to just keep your head down and just do your work and do really good work, and your work will speak for itself. And that doesn't happen in corporate America. You have to be able to get on a bullhorn and talk about yourself and toot your own horn and all of these things that I just didn't know how to do. And so I think your question was, do people like me suffer from that? And I absolutely agree. I think Asian and South Asian women specifically are likely to be let go. We're not the most outright, meaning like we're not the most extroverted, maybe in conference rooms and things like this. And so there's cultural nuances as to why that might be the case.
Yeah, and I guess like my question actually wasn't racially based at all. I was thinking just more in terms of personality type. Was it the fact that your type of personality, which of course could be impacted by your racial heritage as well. But I was thinking from that. But the thing that strikes me, and I don't know to what extent you've got experience with this, but America seems to be pretty full on in the corporate world, and the typical American approach is different. Like although if we want to talk color of the skin, I'm white. I'd suggest that our culture is quite different to the American culture. We come from a very much an English background, much more conservative, much more not about, I mean, it's quite frowned upon to sort of toot your own horn kind of thing, as it were. We're very, very much, you're a show off if you like that. Whereas when we look at America, we see people that seem to be incredibly self-confident and not afraid to promote themselves, whereas us, we're not like that. So, yeah, I mean, it's just interesting, isn't it? I mean, we're talking, even variations with the same color of skin can be quite significant too. And I'm not sure if I was in corporate America, I may well have found myself in a similar predicament to yourself.
Absolutely. Right. So, collectivism and individualism, there are certain cultures that are just known to be more collective. So Asian cultures are, Latin cultures, Arab cultures, African cultures. It's very much about group harmony. And North America, certain European countries are more individual based. Right. So you're right. You could absolutely struggle, and you could struggle because you're introverted, or you could struggle because you're neurodivergent. I mean, there's so many groups of people that just don't feel comfortable self-advocating. And so that is when Be Your Own Cheerleader could be helpful to those folks.
Yeah. So tell me, one thing I'm particularly interested in is your experience pre-COVID versus post-COVID, and what you've seen in your industry. What sort of changes you've seen and what you're predicting for the future as a consequence.
Are we speaking about burnout specifically in terms of
burnout and looking after the wellness of employees?
So I think pre-COVID, there was, everyone was expected to be at work 5 days a week, and that in and of itself causes issues. So there was burnout definitely before COVID, and now the burnout and continues to be. So we've moved to hybrid, but let's rewind just a little bit. Let's rewind like a couple of years when we were all 100% virtual. I think what was happening and still continues to happen is the burnout is associated with your employer or your boss or your team members might think that you don't need downtime because you're not commuting. So pre-COVID, we used to actually spend time going and coming from work. And so that was time for us to just sort of unwind and decompress. But what's happening now is we're booked meeting after meeting after meeting with no time to synthesize information, no time for self-reflection, to think about the next meeting. And so the burnout is really what's happening now, is just because we're not giving ourselves buffers. And I know some organizations are like meeting free Fridays, or they give you pockets of time where it's like heads down and doing deep work. but it's up to the organization to actually adhere to that. And I find that these policies are really great, but if the leaders aren't doing that themselves, they're sending a mixed message to employees. So if they're sending messages or calling you or texting you or whatever during those down times when you're supposed to be sort of deep work, that's sending mixed signals and mixed messages.
It's interesting what you were just saying there, because I hadn't really thought about it, but it makes perfect sense. So do you think that in some respects, that maybe it's actually put more pressure on employees now, that, as you say, if they're at home, there's this perception that they're more available, whereas before you at least had that break of the traffic or, getting to and from work. Yeah. So do you think it's actually got worse, possibly?
I mean, I don't know on a scale of like what's better or worse. I mean, at least in New York City, the traffic here is horrendous. So that could cause stress. Getting to work and coming back from work, that's stressful, right? But then you have now, so many of the people I coach, they go to work 3 days a week, like physically go into work 3 days a week, and they're working from home 2 days a week. So it's different types of stress, but I think it didn't decrease because of COVID. I think, in fact, some aspects increased, especially for women. I mean, there's research about caretaking and how alongside working, your children are at home or you're taking care of elderly parents, and all of these things are happening. So the level of stress and burnout has increased in different ways, I would say.
And do you think, have people changed insofar as, have people through the whole COVID experience become more vocal in trying to protect their rights and look after their well-being, or are they just carried on as before?
I mean, I don't know about you, but I've noticed that since the pandemic, we have become more human on LinkedIn, where people actually post about their weekends or things that they're doing. Whereas you would see that on different platforms. You might see that on Instagram, or if people are still on Facebook or Twitter, right? Like you're focused on your personal life on different platforms. But what I've noticed is that since COVID, people are actually trying to bring their full selves to work and to LinkedIn, and to be vocal about the fact that they may be struggling with something. And I think that is when someone opens the door and then people start following, I think it lends itself to have a more open discussion about what's going on with you at home.
Yeah. And for you, I mean, just how big a deal is it, this whole thing of protecting your wellness and avoiding burnout? I mean, to what extent is it prevalent in American commercial society?
I mean, if you look at the numbers of depression, of people suffering from depression, from anxiety, from all of the research on how many people take antidepressants and anti-anxiety pills, I mean, it is staggering. And I think it is because we come, in the US specifically, it's very much a hustle culture. Well, maybe it's not like that in the middle of the country, but I can speak from East Coast and West Coast experiences where it is very much about hustle culture. And so, yeah, burnout is still real and relevant. And the reason it's so important for me is because I used to suffer from debilitating panic attacks many years ago, and I didn't have the vocabulary to talk about what was going on with me. And that's another thing about Asian and South Asian culture, is mental health is something that's sort of like swept under the rug. You want to maintain this level of perfectionism with your family, and so, or with your surrounding community, and so it's just something that you don't speak about. So I didn't have the vocabulary to talk about it, and so I realized that I wanted to figure out a more holistic path to deal with my own mental health issues. And so before I could help anyone, I had to help myself, which is what opened the door for me to explore all sorts of different holistic modalities of healing.
And so with employers in America, has there been a shift at all in terms of their cognizance of the importance of looking after the well-being of their staff, or do you think they're just carried on as business as usual post-COVID?
I think some organizations truly are making a concerted effort. There's more resources available. There's more partnerships with organizations that provide psychotherapy or coaching. However, there are some other organizations where it is just lip service. It really depends. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know, maybe it's different in New Zealand and in the Australia region, but I just feel like in the US, there are companies that really believe in it and they are focused on it. And then there's also some companies that just treat you like another number.
Yeah.
And you're just sort of a disposable resource.
Yeah. And I think that would be, I'm sure, commonplace around the world. And I think it's just the reality. If there's ever a change in society, it takes time. And there's always going to be those that resist that change. And it's only with time that you'll see more and more significance in the changes that occur. So I don't think it's too surprising if some are not going down that path. But I just keep thinking back to what you said to me earlier about when you were made redundant to that in jobs, and then they escorted you to your desk and then out. It's just horrendous, really. I mean, why was it like that? And I'm assuming it probably still exists. Why would they treat people like that?
I know it still exists because I have many clients that I coach who they literally logged into their computer one morning and they couldn't access their email. They weren't even told that their job was eliminated. So I know these kind of practices still exist. We've just converted that model that I was in 2013 before the pandemic, and now it's converted to sort of virtual, no compassion for your employees. So yes, I think it absolutely still happens. And I think the reason that it happened that way for me is, so, people can get triggered. There have been instances where people have fought back or, brought guns to work. I mean, I know that sounds awful, but I think the fear is really that someone will take revenge or be revengeful in that moment, or their anger, they're just triggered and they're going to take some sort of action that will harm those around them. And so that's really why I think they treat people like criminals when you're escorted back to your desk.
But isn't by that behavior encouraging you to respond like that? Whereas if you went through like a consultation process and kind of were involved in it and the respect was given to you as part of that process, and in a much more sensitive and understanding approach was taken, wouldn't that help to alleviate those sort of potential issues?
You would think. Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I don't know why they still continue to do, many organizations, especially with financial services, or if there's, highly secure, your laptop has highly sensitive or secure information. They just don't want you to do anything that would harm the company or harm people around you. But I agree with you. A more compassionate approach would probably alleviate the chance of someone being triggered and to react unresourcefully.
Yeah. It just seems like a horrendous experience that you wouldn't wish on anyone, really.
Oh, that wasn't my first time. I've had numerous instances like that.
Yeah, no, it's quite staggering, really. So from your point of view, to what extent, and we touched on this before, but to what extent do you think that some cultures are better than others at dealing with the whole burnout and taking care of one's well-being?
So, I mean, I cannot speak from all other cultures, but I know from Asian and South Asian cultures, we are just taught to work really hard and the work will speak for itself, especially if you're an immigrant. So my parents, we came here from India, and I was small, but I was raised by my immigrant parents. And so one of the things is just keep your head down, work really hard, don't speak up, and your work will speak for itself. And that's just a recipe for disaster. And so what happens is you just continue to work, and you don't ask for help, you don't ask for support, because you think that you'll be reprimanded or you'll be looked at as less competent if you tell your manager that you need to offload some of your work. And so it just lends itself to burnout. And there's this other component. Oh, I'm sorry. There's this other component. There's this other component. Also, some of the people I have coached throughout the years, they are on sponsored visas to be in the US. And so there's fear for them to speak up because they feel like they would lose their ability to stay in the US. So it's just an added layer of a recipe for burnout.
Yeah. And what about, though, in terms of other elements of people's cultures? And I'm thinking specifically something like, meditation, Tai Chi, that sort of thing. To what extent do you think cultures adopt those sort of strategies to help them, and what extent that actually is beneficial to them, as opposed to like the European who doesn't have meditation and Tai Chi and so forth in their culture by nature? Do you see that that's of benefit to people?
I've noticed that for the US on the West Coast, let's say the Bay Area where all of the technology companies are, there is definitely an appetite for meditation, for mindfulness in the workplace, in meetings. I have led sessions, I have led workshops where I'm about to teach content, but we start with a few moments of silence. That is very common in tech. It's very common on the West Coast. I think the East Coast is yet to come on board. And so I find myself constantly struggling with some of the organizations and the industries that I work heavily in, like financial services. I think these investment banks don't really understand that this cluttered mind or this chatter that's going on is not going to help your employees. You really need to create a space for them to produce and to be productive. And if our minds are so cluttered, we're not going to be able to be our best selves at work.
Yeah. Yeah. I just always sort of wonder. I mean, I try to do meditation, and for me, mental well-being is incredibly important. You know, if you go through stress, you can see how it can be very detrimental to your health and mental well-being, obviously, and developing strategies to try and negate that and avoid it, obviously, if you can. For me, I think the two of the pillars for me would be meditation and also getting a good night's sleep. I'm a big advocate to getting a good night's sleep. That if you get a decent night's sleep, it's amazing how much better you are or how much more you're able to cope with the challenges of the next day than if you're getting up and you've had very little sleep.
So one of the systems that I use with myself and with people I coach is Ayurveda, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ayurveda. It's an ancient healing system that comes from India. And so Ayurveda specifically talks about morning routines and evening routines that set you up to be mindful the next day and to set you up to be productive. And so sleep is one of those big ones. And there's a lot of things that we can do. And so what happens a lot is people are currently like consuming so much content. There's so many podcasts, there's so many blogs, there's so many shows. And so you can even get overwhelmed learning about all of the strategies for burnout. So I often say, like, choose one or two and implement those every day. Like, have the discipline to just pick one or two small things. So if it is to be in bed at a certain time, try to do that every night just to set yourself up to get restorative sleep. So I think sleep hygiene is very important for your mental well-being.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I think another thing for me too is exercise. Really important to get exercise.
Yes, I agree 100%.
So do you think, looking back, has the experience of COVID and working from home, has it helped at all, do you think, in terms of your industry and getting people to develop better habits? Or has it really had no impact, or has it actually made things worse?
I think in a way, I think it's helped. And I say that because before COVID, we didn't really openly talk about mental health. And then the pandemic happened and there was so much that went on in the world. And so it sort of lend itself to be more open about what we're experiencing. So in that way, I think we've become more vocal. And now it's up to companies to actually provide the platforms to help their employees. But I do think COVID allowed us to be more open and to attempt to talk about bring our personal selves to work. So bringing our full selves to work.
And do you think, in terms of the whole working from home versus going into the office, what are you seeing in America? Is it a hybrid? Is the common approach these days?
We are moving to hybrid. So many companies are now saying be in the office 3 days a week and you can work from home 2 days a week. And the idea is that those 3 days you are having your meetings that are important to have them in person or in real life. And then on those 2 days, you are hopefully downtime where you can actually process and synthesize information. But that's not actually happening. We're still having those back-to-back meetings on those 2 days when we're at home. So there's not a perfect formula, but I think the trend is that we are moving towards 3 days in person and 2 days at home.
Right. So now, I guess all I'm interested to ask you is maybe if you could tell me a little bit about your book, Being Your Own Cheerleader, how it's come about, and in particular, what is the book about?
So Be Your Own Cheerleader is a book that's catered towards Asian and South Asian women on self-advocacy. But what I'm finding is that it is applicable for anyone that struggles with speaking up. So as we were talking about earlier, you don't have to just be Asian or South Asian for this to be helpful, but it's around, so the 3 areas I cover in the book are culture. So I talk specifically about why it's challenging for Asian and South Asians to speak up. Psychological, so things that we can do to mentally prep to have those conversations. And then spiritual, some aspects of spirituality, including meditation. That's a big component of the 3rd section of my book, is really clearing your mind in order to self-advocate. And so self-advocacy isn't just talking and speaking about yourself in in performance review conversations, it's also just to ask for what you need, specifically as it relates to burnout. So not just to do your work and hope that your work speaks for itself, but speak up when you need assistance and speak up when your ideas are being taken away from you.
So do you ever reflect back on your former self and that journey that you had, and if you were equipped like you are now, how that may have impacted on the outcomes?
100%. If I knew now, if I knew what is that saying? If I knew now what I knew then, what is the saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
think of it myself.
Yeah, it's the end of the workday, so my brain is a little fried. But I would say that yes, it would absolutely have impacted the way I handled situations specifically. And there's one that I cover in my book that I think it sort of encapsulates what the workplace is like. So I was working with a consultant. So I was working in consulting, and there was a senior consultant I was working with, and we worked till like 11 p.m. one evening, and we finished everything. We had a client meeting the next morning, and the meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. That's what my teammate said to me. He said, "Be here at 10 a.m." And the meeting actually started at 9 a.m. So he purposefully did not tell me to be there on time. So one, I looked unprofessional, and two, I was not able to share what I did in the process of all of the research. So that in and of itself shows you how cutthroat some of these industries are. And so and I didn't know how to speak up. So I didn't go to my manager and share what happened. I just put my head down and said, "Oh my goodness, like, what do I do? Like, I don't know what to do about this." So if the me now could go back and talk to the younger self, I would have actually said something in that meeting and said, "Actually, we were working together on this, and I was given the wrong time." I would have cleared the slate then and there. And I think back then I just did not have the skills to do that.
I think that it's just appalling that someone would actually pull a stunt like that.
Yes. Yes.
Incredible.
Yes.
It's that
These are all
cutthroat that
truths.
people
Yes.
would do that.
Yes.
Wow. It's not a great culture though, is it? I mean, if you think about it, if that's the way people operate, it's not going to achieve the optimum, is it? You're too busy playing politics all the time, trying to outdo other employees instead of working collaboratively for the best outcome for the business. I mean, it's just not going to achieve the best outcome.
And actually, people who have to fake or lie, that is part of their job. So you might want to add that to your title, because it's almost like you have to do this in order to survive. And those are the cultures that I think are so toxic.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't happen in New Zealand at all,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think it happens to the extreme to what you're talking about. That's just extraordinary. And I guess, but having said that, though, there's always, in my personal career experience, there's always people that play the political games, and then there's the others that just want to get on and be really good at what they do. And I've always been an advocate for just do your job really well. But I have to be honest and say I've certainly seen people that are better at playing the political games and doing their job actually succeed over those that were actually better at their jobs.
Unfortunately, I've seen that as well, and I continue to see that. I see that with people who continuously get promoted. And when you look at actually what they're doing in the organization, they're playing the political game. So it absolutely still exists.
Mm. And definitely, I would say too, and I'm not trying to dismiss the whole female and culture thing, but it happens to everyone too, just maybe to varying degrees.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it must be. I just wonder, like, how much more challenging it is if you are a female, and then add on top of that, if you are from another culture in a work environment and achieving, how much more challenging that must make it.
I mean, if you think of, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when you're a white male, you really are quite ignorant. You've got no idea. But yeah, I'm interested from your perspective on that and to what extent that really is a problem.
I mean, there's so it's, it's intersectionality. You're a woman, and then you also come from a culture where it's very we based. So there's multiple approaches, multiple things going on. So even if we just look at research for women, if a woman speaks up in a conference room or in a meeting, and she's constantly speaking up and saying, this is my idea, or let's circle back to my idea, she's going to be labeled as aggressive or confrontational. Whereas if a white man does that, they're just bringing attention to their work. So the perception is even still viewed very differently. And then if you add on that the layer of coming from a culture where you don't feel comfortable constantly interjecting, where you perceive that as being rude, you are going to be on the sidelines and your ideas will be taken, or you won't get to showcase that you have leadership qualities, because everyone's going to assume that if you're silent, you don't know what you're doing. So there's intersections on that. But I think women in general struggle with sort of the labels that are put on us, but then also adding the component of culture makes it that much more difficult and challenging to navigate.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Just as you're talking, I have no doubt, and I can't fathom it myself. It's just not the way I've been brought up. But I can't fathom why people should look at a female any different to a male. It should all be about how good you are at your job. But as you say, you then add a cultural element to it when you're not accustomed. It's not natural for you to stand up and advocate for yourself, and which is particularly important, I think, when you are in a sexist environment where, the favoritism is towards the male. You need to be able to advocate for yourself, and promote your position in that, because you're so much against it anyway, and you're just you're doubling down on the difficulties that you're going to have in achieving, any sort of success.
Yes, it is something that is not, if you don't have the lived experience, I don't know if people can actually understand how challenging it can be.
And how hard is it? Like, if you do come from another culture, how hard is it to make that change when it's not inherently in you?
Right. I mean, it's you constantly flexing, right? It's that person, that woman who's, let's say, coming, like, for example, even for myself, is constantly flexing. And I think ultimately it becomes a muscle. So that's where Be Your Own Cheerleader is really about, is like, it's a self-advocacy muscle that you just keep flexing, and you become more inclined to do it. The challenge becomes, though, it's that if we are constantly expected to flex, the assumption there is that we are letting go of that we-ness. There are some beautiful things that come from collective cultures that I wish more, the North America landscape would take and actually use, because there are some beautiful aspects of collective culture. So my challenge, I think, and when I work with people, is I say, I'm going to help you dance between the we and the I, but I'm most certainly not telling you to let go of your we-ness. I want you to bring the collective aspects that are beautiful to you. You're still yourself. I'm just giving you tools to navigate this we versus I dial.
And I think that's great. I'm really like hearing you say that, because I think that's really important. I think it's what's quite sad, and I've seen it from time to time, where, females in a male-dominated industry almost take on looking like a male to get ahead, and losing themselves in it. And I think that's really sad. And I think, like you said, and I touched on earlier, working collectively in the right managed environment, you can achieve a great deal more. Stamping out this mentality of one-upmanship on your colleague to try and get ahead is counterproductive to the overall success of the business. So it would be sad if you were encouraging people just to simulate with being a white male in the industry to get ahead. I think it's important that people don't lose their individuality and somehow bridge that gap. So yeah, it's great to hear that you're encouraging that.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed I had so many years where I felt like I had to basically change who I was in order to fit in. And it never really worked, because ultimately we are who we are. And so I think now, if we can be open about it, also learn some skills and know that it's context specific. So I usually use the analogy of a car and a speedometer in a car. So there's the we part of the dial and the I part. So if you're in a group meeting in a team deliverable, you turn up the we and you talk about your shared deliverables, your shared outcomes. And if you're in a performance review conversation, that's when you talk about your I, you talk about your credentials, your accomplishments. And so just knowing that there's a dial and that you can navigate this dial allows you to be authentic to who you are. You just are turning up or down these dials based on the context and who's in front of you.
And so tell me, for you, what's the next few years going to look like? What's your goals going forward from here?
That is a good question. I am still working that through. I mean, I know I'm more speaking engagements. I facilitate in many organizations. I would like to get on some TED stages, work on my second book. So that's sort of like coming. And I haven't quite figured out the timeline for all of that.
And is there many other people doing what you do? You know, is there enough people out there doing it? Because obviously it requires a fundamental shift in society, and one person on their own, although, you know, obviously you want to make a difference, but it really needs a big shift. Is there enough people out there promoting what you promote?
When you ask promoting what I promote specifically, what are you referring to?
I'm referring to taking better account of the uniqueness of everyone and allowing everyone to shine in their own way and get ahead, and not having to conform with a white male, you know, sort of projection in the business community in America.
I think that there's a shift, but you're right. It's still an uphill battle, and it really depends on who's in the organization and who's leading these efforts. So when I work with different organizations and the ERG, the employee resource groups, are headed by white men, they typically, it seems to be that they are relying on other people for that lived experience. So I've noticed that with these groups of people that are heading up the learning and development, or heading up the ERG, or the diversity, equity, and inclusion, if they are people of color, if they are women, I think there's more initiative happening because there's that lived experience. So I think, yes, I hear you. It is an uphill battle, but I think there's more people that understand that assimilation, you lose so many beautiful qualities of the cultures that we come from. And that's really that doesn't lend itself to being a diverse workplace.
No. And do you think, I think if I've interpreted you correctly earlier, the tech industry, are they one of the better industries in terms of taking on these issues?
From my experience, they are more progressive. So they have more initiatives and they're very diverse, right? So engineers, software developers, all of these people, they're very diverse backgrounds. And so I think there is more initiative in the tech industry to make everyone feel like, yes, bring all of you to work. And so from my experience working with various industries like financial services, consulting, and tech, I find tech to be the most progressive.
Right. And so in terms of your business, obviously you're New York based, but do you have clients around? I mean, obviously you have clients across America and on the West Coast, but what about overseas? Have you been doing much work with people in other countries?
I have. And usually what happens is I'm brought in, for example, I do a lot of work in India, but what happens is there's organizations that are they're based in the US and they have a huge workforce in India. So the work that I'm doing is helping those Indian employees acclimate a bit to the expectations of a North America workplace. I have also worked in different parts where there's headquarters here, but there's huge workforces in different parts of Asia.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it must be interesting and good to be able to deal with people in different countries. And I think, that's an interesting aspect that, like you said, that but companies where they may have quite a contingent of employees in another country such as India, and then trying to bring them together within the culture of, the corporate American company.
And there's still a dance, right? Because I don't want to be telling those people that are in India, from India, that they need to, again, change who they are to report to an American manager. So it is a fine dance of like, here are some skills that you might need in order to advocate for yourself, but still keep who you are, keep these beautiful principles that you live by, but there's some things that you need to do and flex when you're at work. And so that's really been some of the work that I've been focused on lately.
Oh, it sounds exciting. All right, Neelu, so thank you so much for spending a bit of time with us today. Now, I know I've managed to convince you to stay on. I'm going to do a little Read to Succeed interview in a moment, but thank you for sharing with us. I think what you're doing is incredible. I think it's really important. I think it's sad that you need to be doing what you're doing, but it is what it is, and we just have to accept that and take the challenge on. But I think it's really important work, and I think it's super important that you are not wanting people to lose who they are. You do not want to sell your soul. You are who you are, but sometimes you just have to kind of mold yourself, I guess, a little bit to try and work through the system, as it were, to achieve a better outcome. So, yeah, I think it's really admirable what you're doing, and I really respect it. So well done to you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.